Did you ever have a time where everyone was telling you what you should do? That everyone seemed to have this incredible idea about what you should do with your life. And it's kind of funny because they seem so certain about what you should do with your life. And it might be a job thing where there's a job that you feel like you should take, or maybe you don't want to take, or that you don't like, or maybe that you're thinking of moving someplace, or maybe you don't want to move someplace. Or maybe it's a relationship. That there's a person that everyone's like, who'd be a great match for you? And they're so sure what you should be doing, but you're not so sure that what they're telling you doesn't line up with your thoughts and your feelings and how you feel you should proceed. And as I was putting this message together, I was thinking back to a time, kind of a long time ago now, 1992, which I want to say is 20 years ago, but I know it's actually 30 years ago. I realized I reached that point in my life that whenever I calculate a distance between years, just add 10 to what I think it is, and I'll be okay. So it's funny, 1992 was a funny time for me, or actually a really good time for me, but a challenging in one respect, is that I was still working as a software developer at that point, and I had a job that I really liked. I worked in New York City, worked for a brokerage firm, and it was kind of a cool job because my role was supporting other software developers. So when they got stuck or when they got into certain situations, my job was to kind of get them past that, because a lot of their specialties was on the brokerage side, and my specialty was much more on the computer side. So I loved that job because I kind of come in every day to work having no idea what I was going to have to do that day. And I just kind of loved that, just kind of dealing with whatever comes up, get through it. And remember that in 1992, 30 years ago, which is a long time in a human life, but in computing time, it might as well be a million years ago. Right? Things were so incredibly different at that point. Back then, real computers were those huge machines that were in these special climate-controlled rooms, and you had double locked doors to get back to them. And that's the kind of computers that I worked with. Now, of course, those real computers also had green tubes with just a bunch of text on them, that kind of stuff. And I loved that job because of its nature. But then the company, for good reasons, was starting to change. And my job was transitioning from what I found to be very exciting to, I'm sure, was a perfect job for someone else. But it was moving from being this kind of dealing with the challenges that were coming up to kind of much more day-to-day stuff. That you kind of would get a list of things to do, and you'd show up that day and you'd do those things. And you kind of come back tomorrow and you do more of those kind of things. And it's a good company, it was a safe job, it was a predictable job, and it was the most horrible job in the world for me. And I didn't know what to do. But in 1992, there was also something else interesting going on. That although personal computers had been around for about 10 years, they'd always they kind of sat off to the side a little bit, in the sense that there were some things they did well. You could type documents on them really well, like word processing stuff, or spreadsheets, and they were good at games. But real computers were the things in the back room. Well, my company was launching a personal computing team. Now, there were only 2 people on it at that point. And I looked at what they were doing, and people were using, mice, pointing devices, as opposed to typing commands all the time, and graphical user interfaces, and building applications that were user-focused. In other words, you accommodate the user as opposed to the user having to accommodate the computer. And this was a huge mind shift. And I'm like, I want to do that. Because it's creative, it was energetic. So I went to my managers, and I told them what I wanted to do. And word got out of what I wanted to do. And everyone had an opinion about that move. And everyone's opinion was, this is a terrible idea. You are throwing your career away. These things are never going anywhere. And it was funny, the people that I worked with, I kind of expected that. They have a tech background. They've been working on these systems for years. But my parents, who have no tech background at all, were like, you're throwing your career away. A girl that I was seeing, who was a kindergarten teacher, said, I'm throwing my career away. Now, I'm not putting down kindergarten teachers, but she didn't work with computers at all at that point. So all these people who had no idea what was going on in my life from that perspective were telling me that I was throwing my career away. Well, 30 years later, we all know I was not throwing my career away. Now, it's not that, I'm not trying to say that I was brilliant and I had this incredible insights. My point is that I was drawn to something for valid and good reasons, and everyone around me was telling me I should do something else. But for me, kind of every good thing that happened in that part of my life, that phase of my life and that career really launched off from that point. And it would have been incredibly different if I had actually listened to all the noise around me. Now, we all have these situations in our lives where people are telling us that we should go one way and we feel like we should go another. Now, of course, we don't want to just discount what people tell us. It's important to seek wise counsel. It's important to listen to people that we trust. But it's also important to know yourself and to know the things that are important to you, the things that you want to be. And it's also important not to be afraid to be yourself. It's also important not to be afraid to go where others might be afraid to go. Now, of course, balancing these two ideas is a bit difficult. It's a bit challenging, right? In the sense that, sometimes other people do see things in our lives that we have trouble seeing ourselves. So we want to actually factor those things in. But also, sometimes we see things about our lives that others don't see. And so as we deal with that tension about, should I go with what they're telling me? Should I go with what I'm feeling? That sort of thing often can leave us feeling stuck. Difficult to figure out how to move forward. We don't know how to get past it, because what ends up happening is that so often in our lives that we have a situation where we start analyzing the next step in isolation. Right? And what I mean by that is that, do I do this next thing or not? Should I do that next thing or not? And what happens when we make our decisions in isolation about just the one thing that we want to do, what you end up doing is stressing over small decisions, but not sure how to factor them into the big picture, the big thing that we want to do. The way to get past that, we want to think in terms of a destination, not a step. And what I mean by that is that we need to realize that our lives are a journey, right? On any journey, how do you know what step to take if you don't know where you want to go? If you don't know what your destination is, it is impossible to know which step is the right step. You literally just kind of look under your feet at that moment going, is this a good step? Is that a good step? Should I go east or west? Where are you trying to get to? I don't know. And as crazy as that might sound, when we kind of think about a physical journey, all too often, that's what we find ourselves doing. And so in a situation where we're getting advice from people to go one way, and our feelings are to go the other way, because we don't know our destination, those things become a mix of noise, and we don't really know what to do. But if we have our destination, if we know where we want to get to, making the decision gets a lot easier. So with all this in mind, I wanted to take a look at an event in the life of Jesus that really models for us how we deal with these situations. Because one of the things we'll see is that in this situation, Jesus is getting a ton of pressure from other people to do certain things or not do certain things. And Jesus doesn't get stuck. He has certainty about his steps because he knows what his destination is. And this will actually come to us from the book of John. Remember that John was one of Jesus' closest followers. And after Jesus' death and resurrection, John wrote down for us what he saw Jesus do. And the event we talk about today occurs a short time after the one we talked about last week. Now remember that last week, Jesus had come across a man who had been ill for many years. And the man was unable to walk. And so Jesus healed the man so he could walk. But he healed the man on the Sabbath, right, the official day of rest, and that infuriated people. Well, this event happens sometime after that, more than a few days, but probably not months later. And Jesus had performed that miracle in the city of Jerusalem near the temple, but now he's off in Galilee. Galilee is where he spent most of his time. Galilee was several days' walk from Jerusalem. So as we join this, Jesus is talking with his brothers, and his brothers are trying to get him to go to a celebration of one of the Jewish holidays. And that's where we kind of step into the story. So it says, it was time for the Jewish festival of shelters. Now, the festival of shelters was an important holiday in the Jewish calendar because it was meant to commemorate their time when their ancestors were in the desert following Moses. And the reason that's important is because as they were walking in the desert, they had not gotten to a home yet, right? They were nomadic. They hadn't found a permanent place to be. And so while they were in the desert, they had to stay in these portable shelters, effectively tents. And so what they celebrate on this holiday is the fact that when they were on this journey, when they were traveling, in the absence of a permanent home, they had to set up this temporary shelter all the time. And in fact, actually, as they celebrate the holiday, what they do is they actually do not go inside their actual homes. They actually stay for a few days in these tents to remind them of the fact that while on a journey without reaching their permanent home, they were reliant on temporary shelters. Jesus then, as he talks to his brothers, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, where your followers can see your miracles." So as we do that, as we see that, it sounds like his brothers are cheering him on. Right? It sounds like his brothers are like, yeah, go show everybody. But there's something we know about Jesus' brothers. Jesus' brothers didn't believe in him. Jesus' brothers thought he was maybe crazy or maybe putting on a show. They didn't really know. So as they say this to him, they're actually mocking him. They're actually making fun of him. And so as we continue, they say, you can't become famous if you hide like this. If you can do such wonderful things, show yourself to the world. In other words, if you're so awesome, make it known. And John wants to be crystal clear that this is not his brothers supporting him. This is his brothers challenging him. Because as it continues, John tells us that even his brothers didn't believe in him. So here's the thing for Jesus. The people who are closest to him, his brothers are not only making fun of him, they are trying to pressure him to say, well, if you can do all those things, go now and go do them. But fortunately, Jesus feels no need to prove himself. Jesus stands strong, moving in his own timing. So Jesus goes on to say, now is not the right time for me to go, but you can go anytime. You go on. I'm not going to this festival because my time has not yet come. In other words, I know my purpose, I know my destination, and I know what I'm here to do. And because of that, he had confidence. So as others pushed him, as others tried to pressure him, he stands strong. So then Jesus' brothers leave. And what do you think he does? Now he goes to the festival. He's not going to be surrounded by people who are drawing him off what he needs to be doing. He's not going to be surrounded by people who keep challenging him and trying to trip him up because he knows where he's trying to get to. He knows what he's trying to do. So as he travels, though, he actually does it with a very low profile. He actually kind of travels in secret. And this was really important because if he would have walked in straight away into the festival, he could have been captured, he could have been killed. Because remember that the religious leaders, they despise him. And they are actually plotting to kill him. But in spite of all that, as he's kind of hiding from them, word about Jesus is getting around. And people are starting to really talk about him. In fact, everyone is talking about him at the event, even though they don't know he's there. So John goes on to tell us, there was a lot of grumbling about him among the crowds. Some argued, he's a good man. But others said, he's nothing but a fraud who deceives people. So people's opinions are all over the place about Jesus. And imagine if Jesus was making his decisions about what to do based on public opinion. So sometimes you might hear somebody say something good about what he's doing, so he feels all pumped up and, yeah, we can keep doing this. But other times he's going to hear people say things bad about him. He's going to feel bad about what he's doing because opinion jumps all over the place. But how often does that happen to us? How often for us, as we try to do things that we feel good about or we feel are important, we start getting all kinds of noise, right? This has always been true. But in a world of social media and cable news and all those sort of things where everybody talks about everything forever, those things go on all the time. But here's the thing I think that happens that we don't realize we're letting happen. That if we make our decisions about what we do and how we go about things based on the opinions of people around us, what we're actually doing is we're actually allowing people to write our story for us. That we are giving up control of our story because we are allowing them to make us feel confused and down about the things that we are doing. And that can cause us to feel stuck. Because even if we're hearing good opinions and bad opinions, we know that the negative opinions, the bad opinions, impact us the most. But if we're confident in our destination, if we're confident where we're trying to get to, if we're confident why we're trying to do it, we're not a slave to the opinion of others. And although we may hear both good and bad opinions, which opinions speak most loudly? The negative. Because we're told that no one had the courage to speak favorably about Jesus in public, for they were afraid of getting in trouble with the Jewish leaders. So now in this case, people were being quiet about the positive because they were afraid. But isn't it kind of always true that the people who are negative, the people who are unhappy, are the people who speak the loudest and the most often? But then there's another thing beyond that. Not only is it the negative people who tend to speak the loudest, but even if you're getting positive feedback, if you hear 50 good things about what you're doing and one bad thing, which one do you spend the most time thinking about? Bad. It's kind of just the way our brains seem to work. So we have to break free from those. Because those people are basically, if you're out there trying to do what's important, all those people talking about you, they're just spectators. And the spectators don't get to control the game. Right? The athlete controls the game. And so we don't want to allow the spectators to drive our actions, to force us into a path that's not right for us. But we can only do that by staying focused on our destination. And for Jesus in this moment, his destination is crystal clear to him. It's to go to the temple and teach during the festival. So to do that, because he knew his destination, he knew the best way to do that was to keep a low profile, kind of stay out of sight until there was time to teach. And then when Jesus arrives, he begins teaching. It says the people were surprised when they heard him. How does he know so much when he hasn't been trained? They asked. So Jesus begins to teach, and he's teaching well, right? And he's actually teaching in a way that people go, I've not heard things like this before. This guy seems to know so much. But instead of saying, he's awesome, look at him go, what do they do? Well, he's teaching well, but geez, he doesn't seem to fit the mold. They're kind of focused on the fact that he doesn't meet their expectations. That they're trying to kind of put him in a box. I mean, he can't know that much. We know where he comes from. We know his parents. He wasn't trained for this. And so even as he's doing well, people's response to him is that he doesn't meet our expectations. He doesn't fit in that box that we think he should be inside of. But because Jesus knew his purpose, he knew his destination, he doesn't waste time trying to conform to their expectations. He simply does what he came to do. So he continues to teach. And as he's there, he says that, I've been sent by God and I have a message to share with you. And people start to become hostile as he does that. And as he's talking, not only does he talk about where he's from and what he's here to show, he also starts talking about them a bit. And he starts calling their actions into question. And he focuses on their fact that they seem to have this obsession over rules, over religion. And not that rules are bad and not religion is bad, but they are focusing on those things at the cost of the well-being of people. That they're putting conforming to rules ahead of taking care of people. And then to make his point, he actually references back to that event we talked about last week, where the man was healed. Again, remember, the man was unable to walk. We're told he'd been unable to walk for 38 years. So Jesus healed him, gave him the ability to walk, and told him to take that mat that he'd been trapped on for years and carry it off with him. But he did it on the Sabbath, the day you're not supposed to work. And people called him out for that, saying that you're not supposed to do that. But then Jesus turns and calls them out for their hypocrisy, for their double standard. And this is all triggered by the fact that they're upset that he healed somebody on the Sabbath. They were losing sight of the fact that a person's life had been changed, that someone had been transformed. But it seemed that no one noticed that. Everyone was just upset about breaking a rule. And so he confronts them on this issue with something to us that will seem a bit strange. But he actually makes the point really well here. So it says, Jesus replied, I did one miracle on the Sabbath, and you were amazed. But you work on the Sabbath too, when you obey Moses' law of circumcision. Now, that's kind of an odd comparison, right? What does one have to do with the other? Well, just think about it. So the circumcision ritual is supposed to occur when you have a son 8 days after he's born. And you do that ritual on the 8th day, even if it's the Sabbath day, the day you're not supposed to work. And so what Jesus is pointing out is that act, that ritual, because that ritual identifies you as God's people. That's what it's meant for. And so that ritual is important, and it's good. It's so good that it's okay to do on the day you're not supposed to work. So Jesus is like, so you're saying it's okay to follow that rule and ritual because it's good, but investing in people, helping people, is not good. Jesus is pointing out that you've lost focus on what matters. You've lost focus on what God has called you to do. And then Jesus makes his key point, but it's not obvious. But let's take a look at it. Jesus says, look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. In other words, move beyond appearances. You're so focused on the rules and the rituals, the things people see you doing, that you've lost sight of their meaning. This ritual is meant to symbolize that you are the people of God. Well, so is caring for people. So is helping people. So If it's okay to undertake an act that symbolizes that you're the people of God, it is certainly okay to undertake an act of helping someone. Because that doesn't just symbolize that you're the people of God, that demonstrates that you're the people of God. If you can do something that is symbolic, you can certainly do something that demonstrates. And as we do that, and as we care for people, not only do we help what they're dealing with, but also, you never know, that it might help to draw them closer to God. And then Jesus uses this opportunity to make his key point, that he has come to provide a better way. He's come to provide a way that is better than rules, that is better than religion, that is better than rituals. He has come to give renewal. He has come to give us a path to a life that lasts. And he was able to make his point just as he intended in front of this crowd during the festival because he knew what his destination was. There were 1,000 opportunities to get pulled off of his path, but he knew what he was there to do. You know, and if we look closely at Jesus' experience here, one of the things it shows us is a point that could be so easy to forget. That all the challenges that we experience in our lives, Jesus experienced as well. And so he's gone through all the things we've gone through. And in this situation, right, he actually has gone through people telling him what he should or should not do. And he's gone through having a wide array of opinions thrown at him. Negative ones being thrown most loudly at him. And he's gone through being put into a box and people expecting him to conform to their expectations. But none of those things stopped Jesus because he knew his destination. He knew where he was headed. He knew what he was here to do. He was confident in his purpose on this particular journey. And because he was confident in that, he could confidently take each step, letting none of those things draw him away, letting none of that noise pull him off of his task. And so the same is true for our lives. That as we go through our lives, we want to really focus on that if we can specify our destination, specify what we're meant to do, specify what we're called to do, the way to not get stuck is be clear on our goals and measure our steps and measure our actions against that goal, that thing that we are trying to do. And whether you're a Jesus follower or not, whether you're a Christian or not, that's good advice no matter how you look at it. But if you are a Jesus follower, if you are someone who has put your faith in Jesus, the example that Jesus is setting here runs so much deeper. Because Jesus certainly had a clear destination on this trip, but it was not his only destination. Jesus also had a larger destination, a destination of eternal significance. He had come to redeem the world through his death and resurrection. So as Jesus measured each step, he certainly measured it against his destination to get to the temple and teach that day, but he also measured each step and how it fits in his larger destination. How does each step measure against the eternal value of that step? And I believe that's something that Jesus wanted us all to see. Because remember that all this goes down at the Festival of Shelters. And there are many holidays throughout the Jewish calendar. And I believe it is no accident that this goes on during the Festival of Shelters. Again, what does that festival commemorate? The time when the Hebrews were in the desert, not yet having reached their permanent home. They were on a journey where they were living in temporary shelters. And I think it reminds us that this life is a journey, and this is a temporary shelter. And this world is temporary. And one day we will each reach our eternal home. And we want to keep that in mind. So as we set our goals in this life, as we set the destinations that we have in this life, it's important to not just think in terms of this temporary life. I mean, of course, there are things we do in this life focused on this life, but we don't want to just focus on this life. That as we set our destinations, as we set our goals, set goals that have lasting value, set goals that actually impact the lives of others. Go beyond goals that focus just on this temporary journey. Embrace goals that invest in people and that impact eternity. And when we can actually set our eyes on a destination of eternal significance, and we take each step towards a destination of eternal significance, we can move past being stuck because the certainty and the importance of what we do becomes clear. When we focus on temporary goals, everything seems to be in flux. But when our eyes are focused on what is of eternal significance, and we do that with confidence, and we do that with love, and we prioritize caring for and loving people, and we prioritize caring for the people who are most challenged and most hurting, that's when we start to get confidence in our steps, confidence in what we do, and confidence in what Jesus has called us to do.